38 years ago, in the quiet suburb of Elmwood, Texas, a 6-year-old girl named Sarah Thompson vanished from her own backyard on a blistering July afternoon, disappearing so completely that it shattered her family and left the entire town gripped by a fear that never fully faded. Police first treated it as a possible wandering child, but as hours turned to days with no sign, the case hardened into something far darker. Abduction. No ransom demand ever came. No body was discovered. The scant leads dried up almost immediately, and the investigation ground to a halt that felt permanent. Yet through all those long, silent years, Sarah's father, David Thompson, clung to a stubborn, private conviction that his daughter was still out there somewhere. Then, more than 3 decades later, a single overlooked detail, uncovered by someone hundreds of miles away, turned the entire dormant case file upside down and stunned the investigative world. Before we dive deeper into this unbelievable story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love cases that get solved after decades, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. In the summer of 1987, Elmwood still felt like a place where nothing truly bad could happen. Low brick houses lined dusty streets, prickly pear and creosote bushes dotted every yard, and the relentless Texas sun baked everything under a shimmering haze. Children rode bikes until the streetlights buzzed on, played in empty lots without supervision, and neighbors gathered on porches to escape the heat. It was the kind of town where safety wasn't questioned. It was simply assumed. The Thompson family lived toward the southern edge in a modest ranch-style home with a chain-link fence and a wide backyard that opened onto a narrow alley. David Thompson, 35, was a mechanic at the local garage, quiet, dependable, the sort of man who fixed things with steady hands and few words. Lisa Thompson, 32, worked part-time as a nurse, warm and organized, always planning small family outings. Their only child, Sarah, was 6 years old, small, bright-eyed, with sun-bleached blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile. She loved chasing butterflies, collecting shiny rocks, and filling sheets of paper with crayon drawings of jackrabbits and roadrunners. Her closest playmate was Tommy Ruiz, the 8-year-old boy from across the street. Being older, Tommy often kept an eye on her when they were outside together. A few days before everything changed, he mentioned casually to his mother that he'd seen a strange man at the little community park 2 blocks away. Tall, dark-haired, leaning against an older blue pickup truck, just watching the kids on the swings for a long time. It didn't seem worth reporting. Strangers passed through Elmwood often enough, especially with the interstate nearby, and children were taught not to bother adults over every little thing. On Sunday, July 19th, the Thompsons hosted a relaxed backyard barbecue for neighbors and a few friends. The air carried the smell of mesquite smoke and sizzling burgers. Kids darted through the sprinkler, while adults clustered under the shade of a big pecan tree. Sarah, in her favorite pink sundress printed with tiny flowers, begged to keep playing near the swing set while the food finished. David glanced over from the grill every few minutes. Lisa waved from the picnic table. She was right there, twirling in the grass, pushing her doll on the swing. Tommy had come over to join the fun and was kicking a soccer ball against the side fence when he noticed Sarah wander toward the back gate that led straight into the alley. Around 4:15, he looked up and felt a faint unease. The same tall man from the park was standing just outside the chain link, one hand resting on the gate. He appeared to be holding something small. Tommy couldn't make it out clearly, perhaps candy or a small toy. Sarah stopped a few feet away, head tilted as if listening. The man spoke softly, gesturing toward the alley. Sarah hesitated, then took a couple of small steps closer. Tommy watched for a moment, unsure. The man wasn't grabbing her, and Sarah didn't look frightened. Maybe he was asking directions. Tommy turned back to his ball. Less than a minute later came the heavy thud of a truck door closing, followed by the low rumble of an engine starting up. Dust swirled as the blue pickup pulled away down the alley, turning south and vanishing behind the cottonwoods. Tommy thought nothing more of it until Lisa's voice rang out. "Sarah, come eat, sweetheart." Silence. David set down the tongs and walked to the swing set. Empty. He called louder, circling the yard, checking behind the shed and under the tree. Lisa appeared at the back door, her smile fading. Neighbors heard the sharpening edge in their voices and began spreading out, front yards, side streets, the alley. Someone found Sarah's open crayon box, lying near the gate, a half-finished butterfly drawing fluttering in the hot breeze. But Sarah was nowhere. Panic ignited in minutes. Voices shouting her name echoed through the block. People fanned out, checking garages, ditches, empty lots. David ran the alley both ways. Lisa stood frozen in the yard, arms wrapped tight around herself. By 4:45, David was inside dialing 911, his voice controlled only by sheer will. "My daughter's missing. She's 6. She was in our backyard. It's been less than half an hour." The dispatcher recognized the urgency immediately. Patrol cars arrived within minutes, lights cutting through the lingering daylight. Officers took statements on warm porches, taped off the back gate and alley. Tommy, clutching his soccer ball, recounted everything. The tall man, the blue truck, Sarah approaching the gate, the door closing, the truck driving away. Neighbors offered fragments. One heard an engine around 4:20. Another recalled seeing a T. Blue pickup earlier. No one had seen Sarah after she reached the gate. Texas Rangers were called in almost at once. This felt like more than a lost child. A description went out. Adult male, mid-30s, tall, dark hair, older blue pickup, possibly heading south. As night fell and floodlights lit the search, every shadow within blocks was examined. Nothing. No footprints leading away, no dropped clothing, just the crayon box and Tommy's shaken account. By the time darkness fully settled, the once peaceful suburb was alive with radios and urgent voices. The Thompsons sat inside under harsh light, neighbors pressing food on them they couldn't touch, waiting for any word. Outside, the search pushed wider, but whatever trail there might have been had already vanished into the hot Texas night. Sarah had disappeared in the space of a few unguarded minutes from the one place she should have been safest. And for 38 years, the question of what happened to her remained unanswered. The first night after Sarah vanished, Elmwood felt like a different town. What had been a lazy Sunday barbecue dissolved into a scene lit by floodlights and echoing with radio chatter. Patrol cars lined the streets, officers moved house to house, and the hot Texas air carried an edge of urgency that no one could shake. Sergeant Ramirez and the initial Elmwood officers worked fast. They'd taped off the back gate and alley, photographed the crayon box exactly where it lay, and began a grid search of every yard and empty lot within blocks. By the time the Texas Rangers rolled in just after 6, the immediate area had already been swept once, yielding nothing but dust and silence. The Rangers took command smoothly, re-interviewing Tommy on the Thompsons' porch under the yellow glow of the bug light. The boy's account stayed steady. The tall man with dark hair outside the gate, Sarah approaching, the brief quiet conversation, the truck door closing, the blue pickup pulling away south down the alley. They pinned the critical moments as tightly as possible. Sarah at the gate around 4:15 to 4:17, departure between 4:18 and 4:22. A suspect bulletin went out statewide within the hour. White male, mid-30s, tall, dark hair, driving an older blue pickup. Sparse, yes, but it was all they had. Case file. EL 870719 was opened that evening, becoming the hub for every statement, map, and report. Roadblocks went up on the main exits from town. Patrols swept connecting roads with spotlights probing the dark fields. In the alley, floodlights revealed only generic tire tracks in the hard-packed dirt, nothing distinctive. No footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle. The complete absence of disturbance reinforced what Tommy had described. Sarah had left willingly, quickly, without alarm. With no evidence she had wandered off on foot, the focus locked onto the vehicle. Rangers and local PD launched a manual screen of blue pickups registered in Elmwood and the 3 nearest towns. Paper records meant long hours in county clerks' offices, pulling files one by one. The list started at over 100 vehicles. They grouped by age and style, eliminating newer models first, then checked owners' alibis for that Sunday afternoon. Dozens were cleared immediately. Work logs, store receipts, family gatherings with photos. Remaining trucks were visited in person. None showed fresh marks or anything suspicious. By the end of the 3rd day, every traceable local blue pickup had a solid alibi or didn't fit the timing. The lead collapsed under its own vagueness. An older blue pickup in 1987 Texas was simply too common to trace without more. A plate number, a dent, a specific make. Attention shifted to people. Using known patterns from child abduction cases, investigators compiled a list of higher-risk adult males within 20 miles. Anyone with prior complaints involving children, even minor or unsubstantiated. 14 names. Each was contacted discreetly over the following days. Alibis held, confirmed shifts, witnessed outings, documented travel. None had access to a matching vehicle or had been near Elmwood that afternoon. The possibility of a female perpetrator was considered briefly. Statistics made it unlikely in stranger cases, but checked anyway for completeness. No local women with concerning histories matched location or timing. By the end of the first week, every known resident who could possibly fit had been ruled out. The picture sharpened. Whoever took Sarah was an outsider, someone who appeared only long enough to act, then disappeared just as completely. Searches expanded rapidly. Radius jumped to 30 miles, covering dry arroyos, desert trails, isolated ranches. Teams on foot and horseback checked abandoned buildings, questioned farmers about unfamiliar vehicles. Highway patrol stopped blue pickups for days. Tips flooded in. Blonde girls spotted in distant towns. Suspicious trucks heading north or west. Everyone was chased down. Everyone proved false. A month in, the frenzy slowed. No new evidence surfaced. No discarded items along roadsides. No credible sightings. The file thickened with cleared lids and negative searches, but the core questions, who and where, remained blank. Elmwood itself changed. Children stayed indoors after school. Backyard play required constant supervision. Evening patrols became routine. The easy trust of a small town had cracked, and no one knew how to mend it. David Thompson all but stopped working, spending days at the station pressing for updates. Lisa moved through the house like a shadow, starting at every phone ring. Tommy withdrew, haunted by the thought that he might have stopped it if he'd only called out. At the 30-day command review, the unspoken became official. The blue pickup had likely hit the interstate within minutes of leaving the alley. Sarah had been carried out of Texas before anyone even knew she was gone. In an era without traffic cameras, nationwide databases, or rapid alerts, an interstate abduction was nearly impossible to trace. Active investigations scaled back. Officers moved on to new cases. The file stayed open, but the daily urgency faded. For the Thompsons, the real waiting began. A heavy, endless silence that would stretch across years, then decades. Elmwood tried to return to normal, but the empty swing set in the Thompsons' backyard remained a reminder that some questions refused to stay buried forever. The years after 1987 settled over Elmwood like dust after a storm, slow, thick, and impossible to brush away completely. The intense searches, the roadblocks, the constant patrol cars, all of it faded within months. By 1988, the case file had been moved to a quieter corner of the Texas Rangers' offices, still open, but no longer active. Periodic reviews happened every year or two, but each ended with the same note: no new leads, no developments. From 1988 to the mid-1990s, tips still came in occasionally. A blonde child seen at a roadside diner in Oklahoma. A little girl resembling Sarah's description at a county fair in New Mexico. A blue pickup parked outside a motel in Louisiana with a man and child inside. Rangers followed everyone. All turned out to be mistaken identity or coincidence. Some were cruel hoaxes. Over time, the calls grew fewer, then rarer still, until months could pass without a single report. Physical evidence never appeared. No clothing snagged on a fence along the interstate. No small shoe found in a ditch. No crayon drawing or personal item ever surfaced anywhere in Texas or neighboring states. Rangers sent alerts to departments across the Southwest asking for any unusual children's belongings, but nothing matched. By 1992, day-to-day responsibility shifted to the Rangers' cold case unit. The original investigators retired or moved on. Newer officers inherited the thick file and read through it from cover to cover, looking for anything missed. They found the same dead ends: a vague vehicle description, one child witness, no forensics, and a perpetrator who had vanished as cleanly as Sarah herself. The Thompsons refused to let the world forget. David and Lisa mailed Sarah's photo to missing children organizations, appeared on local television, appeals, and drove hundreds of miles to post flyers at truck stops and rest areas along I-10 and I-20. They kept an age-progressed sketch made by a police artist in 1990, Sarah at 10, then at 13, taped to their refrigerator. Every birthday they released balloons in the backyard, 7 at first, then 8, then 9, always one more than the year before. In 1995, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created a new age progression image, Sarah at 18, based on family photos and genetic traits from both parents. The rendering showed a young woman with Lisa's eyes and David's jawline. The Thompsons launched a fresh campaign, sending the image to law enforcement agencies across the Southwest and posting it in post offices, supermarkets, and bus stations. Local news ran segments again. A few calls came in, possible sightings in Albuquerque, Tucson, even California, but each dissolved under scrutiny. By the late 1990s, technology began to change. In 1998, the file was digitized as part of a statewide push to enter old cases into the new national databases. Hundreds of pages, statements, maps, search logs, the few grainy photos of the alley were scanned and uploaded to systems that could, in theory, match against unidentified remains or new suspects nationwide. Sarah's dental records and basic profile joined the network. Yet the matches never came. Annual reviews in 2000, 2002, 2004 all closed with the same summary. No hits in national databases, no connections to other cases, no new information. Elmwood itself moved on, or tried to. New families bought homes on the street. Children grew up hearing the story as local legend, the little girl who disappeared from her backyard one summer afternoon. Parents still warned their kids about strangers, and the alley behind the old Thompson place stayed a little darker in everyone's mind. But daily life resumed. School games, Friday night football, church on Sundays. Tommy Ruiz grew up haunted by that day. He became quieter, more watchful. In high school, he struggled with guilt that never quite left. He had seen it happen and done nothing. Counselors helped, but the memory stayed sharp. As an adult, he moved away, though he returned sometimes to visit his parents and drive slowly past the Thompson house. David aged visibly. He went back to the garage, but worked fewer hours, spending evenings poring over maps or reading about other solved cases, searching for something he might have missed. Lisa kept Sarah's room exactly as it had been, toys on the shelf, drawings pinned to the wall, unable to pack anything away. She joined support groups for parents of missing children, finding comfort in shared grief, but no answers. By 2005, 18 years had passed. The file was thick with negative reports and faded flyers. Digital searches had expanded, but Sarah's case remained stubbornly unmatched. Age progression images now showed her in her mid-20s, longer hair, more mature features, but distribution was limited without fresh developments. In 2010, another milestone, Sarah would have turned 30. Local media ran a short retrospective. David and Lisa gave a brief interview on the courthouse steps, voices steady but eyes tired. They spoke of still hoping, still believing she was alive somewhere. The segment ended with the latest age-progressed image and the Rangers' tip line number. Calls trickled in for a week or two, then stopped. The world had changed dramatically. Cell phones, internet, surveillance cameras everywhere. But none of it reached back to that Sunday afternoon in 1987. No traffic cameras on rural roads then, no GPS, no social media trail. The blue pickup and the tall stranger had simply driven out of Elmwood and into a void that technology still couldn't bridge. By 2015, the case was nearly 3 decades old. Reviews happened every 18 months now, handled by younger investigators who had never met the Thompsons. They read the file, ran fresh database queries, and wrote the familiar conclusion, no new leads. David and Lisa, both in their 60s, had learned to live with the ache. They still released balloons each July. They still kept Sarah's room untouched. They still answered when reporters called on anniversaries. But the raw desperation of the early years had settled into something quieter, heavier, an endurance rather than a fight. Elmwood had grown. New subdivisions spread outward. The alley behind the old house was paved over for a wider street. Few new residents knew the story. The file gathered dust in digital archives, waiting for a spark that no one, not the Rangers, not the Thompsons, not anyone, could have predicted. A spark that, for 28 long years, never came. Meanwhile, 600 miles away in a small rural town outside Tucson, Arizona, a young woman named Mia Vargas was living a life built entirely on secrets she didn't yet understand. Raised by a reclusive man she called father, kept close to home, moved every few years, she'd grown up believing her quiet, controlled world was normal. But as she entered her late 20s and early 30s, small cracks began to appear. Questions about documents that didn't quite add up, memories that didn't fit the stories she'd been told, a growing sense that the past she knew might not be the past she had actually lived. Those cracks would widen slowly, quietly, until one ordinary decision in the early 2020s would send ripples all the way back to a dusty alley in Elmwood, Texas, and finally give the old file the jolt it had waited decades to receive. While the Thompson file sat dormant in Texas databases, gathering virtual dust through the 2000s and 2010s, the little girl who had vanished from that Elmwood backyard was growing up under a completely different name in a quiet rural corner of southern Arizona. She knew herself as Mia Vargas, born in a small hospital outside Tucson, or so the paper said. Her earliest memories were of dusty roads, low adobe houses, and the constant presence of the man she called Dad, Victor Ramos, a tall, dark-haired handyman who moved them every few years and kept the world at arm's length. Victor had appeared in Arizona in late 1987 with a young child he claimed was his daughter. He rented cheap houses on the outskirts, first in a trailer park near Casa Grande, then a small place outside Marana, later a cinderblock home on the edge of the desert south of Tucson. He worked odd jobs, fixing fences, repairing tractors, welding gates, always cash, never long enough in one place to put down roots. Mia's childhood looked ordinary from a distance, but it was carefully bounded. She was homeschooled until middle school, then enrolled in small private or charter programs where paperwork checks were lax, no sleepovers, no extracurriculars that required parental involvement beyond a quick drop-off. Victor attended exactly one parent-teacher conference in her entire school career, and only because the principal insisted. Friends were allowed, but only in controlled doses. Playdates happened at their house, never hers. Birthday parties meant Victor drove her there and waited in the parking lot. When classmates asked why she never had relatives visit, or why there were no baby pictures on the walls, Mia repeated the stories she'd been taught. Mom died when I was a baby. We don't have family nearby. We like it simple. Victor wasn't cruel. He cooked meals, helped with homework, built her a swing from scrap pipe in one backyard. But there was an invisible fence around everything. Questions about the past were gently deflected. We've got each other. That's enough. When Mia pressed harder as she got older, his answers grew vague, sometimes edged with irritation. Some things are better left alone. As a child, Mia accepted it. This was just how her family worked. But as she moved into her teens, small inconsistencies began to nag. A birth certificate that looked oddly crisp for its age. A social security card that arrived years after most kids got theirs. Medical forms. Victor filled out himself, always citing lost records when immunization proof was requested. The way he tensed whenever a school asked for emergency contacts beyond him. Fragmented memories. Surfaced, too. Flashes that didn't fit the Arizona desert life she knew. The smell of barbecue smoke on a hot afternoon. Children's laughter echoing across a grassy yard. A pink dress fluttering in a breeze. The low rumble of a truck engine. A tall man's hand reaching out. They came most often in dreams, leaving her unsettled but unable to pin them down. By 17, Mia had learned not to mention them. Victor's reaction was always the same, a tight smile, a change of subject, sometimes a quiet warning that some dreams aren't worth chasing. She graduated high school in a small ceremony, one of the few times Victor allowed photos. College wasn't encouraged, too expensive, too far, so she took community college classes part-time and worked at a local feed store. Life stayed small, predictable, safe. In her mid-20s, Mia moved out for the first time, an apartment 20 minutes from Victor's latest rental. He didn't protest much, but the rules remained. Call every day, no overnight guests without warning, let him know travel plans. She complied, partly out of habit, partly because arguing felt pointless. Doubts grew slowly. A coworker mentioned uploading family photos to an ancestry site and discovering distant cousins. Mia tried to picture doing the same and realized she had almost no old pictures, nothing before age 7 or 8. When she asked Victor for childhood albums, he said they'd been lost in one of the moves. At 28, applying for a better job at a veterinary clinic, she needed a copy of her birth certificate. The one Victor gave her raised eyebrows at the county office. The seal looked off, the paper too new. They accepted it, but the clerk's puzzled expression stayed with her. That night she searched online for the hospital listed as her birthplace. It had closed in the early 1990s, no records available, a dead end. The questions piled up quietly. Why no extended family? Why the constant moving? Why did Victor avoid anything that required deep background checks and those dream fragments? Why did they feel so real? By 30, Mia had saved enough to live independently. Victor's health was fading, arthritis in his hands, slower movements, but he still lived alone, still called every evening. She visited weekly, bringing groceries, fixing small things around his house. Their conversations stayed on the surface: weather, work, local news. One evening in early 2022, bored and scrolling late at night, Mia saw an ad for a consumer DNA test. Discover your roots. Connect with relatives. The idea lodged. She had never met a blood relative beyond Victor. What if there were cousins out there, aunts? Even if the results were boring, it would be something real. She ordered the kit secretly, having it delivered to her. Work address. When it arrived, she followed the instructions in her car during lunch break. Swab, seal, mail. No one knew. The wait felt endless. Victor called as usual, asking about her day. She answered normally, heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. 6 weeks later, the email arrived. Results ready. That night, alone in her apartment, Mia logged in. Ethnicity estimates first. Mostly European, some indigenous. Nothing surprising for the Southwest. Then the relatives section. The top match stopped her cold. Predicted relationship, first cousin. Shared DNA, 13.9%. Name, Ethan Thompson. Location, Central Texas. Below it, several more distant matches, all carrying the surname Thompson. Mia stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Thompson, not Vargas. And the profile picture of Ethan, a man in his 40s, had eyes that looked unsettlingly familiar. She clicked deeper. Ethan's public tree was small but clear. Parents David and Lisa Thompson, one sibling listed as Sarah Thompson, born 1981, disappeared 1987. The room tilted. Hands shaking, Mia searched the name Sarah Thompson missing 1987 Texas. Articles filled the screen. Photos of a 6-year-old blonde girl in a pink dress, the backyard barbecue, the alley. A witness seeing her approach a tall man beside a blue truck. Every fragmented dream suddenly had context. The barbecue smell, the laughter, the pink dress, the truck engine. Mia read until dawn, comparing childhood photos from news archives to her own reflection. The gap-toothed smile, the shape of the eyes, the way the hair fell. She found the age progression images too, Sarah at 20, 30, 40. The latest one, created in 2015, looked like Mia could have sat for it herself. For days, she barely slept. Victor called. She let it ring. When she finally answered, her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. The DNA didn't lie. The percentages were exact. The relatives were real people, still searching. Mia Vargas, wasn't Mia Vargas at all. She was Sarah Thompson, the girl who had vanished from an Elmwood backyard 35 years earlier. The realization didn't bring relief. It brought terror. Victor, the man who had raised her, fed her, protected her in his strange, suffocating way, had taken her, built an entire life on a lie, kept her hidden all these years. Questions crashed in waves. Why her? Why keep her so long? What would he do if he knew she knew? For weeks, Mia lived in a fog, going to work on autopilot, avoiding Victor's house. She printed the DNA results, the articles, the age progressions, made a private folder on her laptop labeled simply Truth. One night, staring at a photo of David and Lisa Thompson from a 2010 appeal, older, worn, still holding a picture of 6-year-old Sarah, she felt something shift. Not just fear, a pull, a need to know who she really was. The relatives list showed contact options. Ethan had messaged new matches before. Happy to share family. Info. Mia's cursor hovered over the message button for days. Finally, late one night when Victor was asleep miles away, she typed, "Hi, Ethan. This is going to sound strange, but I think we might be more closely related than the site says. Can we talk?" She hit send before she could delete it. The reply came within hours. Absolutely. Call any time. Mia stared at the screen, heart pounding. The door she had just opened couldn't be closed again. Whatever came next, answers, confrontation, reunion, her old life as Mia Vargas was already crumbling. And somewhere in Texas, a file that had gathered dust for decades was about to be pulled from the shelves one final time. The message from Mia Vargas landed in Ethan Thompson's inbox like a quiet thunderclap. He had uploaded his DNA years earlier on a whim, hoping vaguely that it might one day connect to the aunt he had never met, the sister his parents spoke of in careful, pained tones. When the new high match appeared, he noticed the surname mismatch immediately. Vargas, Arizona. No overlap with the Thompson tree, but the percentage was too strong to ignore. First cousin, or closer. His reply was cautious, open. When Mia finally called a few nights later, voice trembling over the line, she didn't waste time on small talk. I think I'm your sister Sarah." Silence stretched across the miles. Then Ethan asked the only question that mattered. "Can you tell me why you think that?" She did. Slowly, haltingly. The DNA results, the articles she'd found. The childhood flashes that suddenly made sense. The forged feel of her documents. The way Victor had always kept her world so small. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I'm sending this to the Rangers right now." Within hours, the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit received an official alert from the DNA company, potential genetic match to a long-term missing child case. The file, EL 870719, was pulled from digital archives and marked active for the first time in decades. Investigators requested raw data from Mia's kit and arranged reference samples from David, Lisa, and Ethan Thompson. The state lab in Austin ran comparisons against the original profile created from family samples in the 1990s. Results came back in under 2 weeks. Parent-child match to David and Lisa, probability greater than 99.999%. Mitochondrial DNA confirmed the maternal line. There was no doubt. Mia Vargas was Sarah Thompson. A multi-agency task force formed overnight, Texas. Rangers, FBI Tucson Field Office, NCOMAC specialists. Their first priority, confirm Sarah was safe and willing, then trace the man who had raised her. Sarah, still thinking of herself as Mia in those early days, agreed to meet investigators at a neutral location. She was 38 now, quiet-spoken, guarded, but clear. She wanted the truth, whatever it cost. Record searches began immediately. Victor Ramos had no criminal history, no priors for violence or child-related offenses. But his residential trail told a story. Arrival in Arizona, late 1987, frequent moves, cash-based jobs, minimal paper trail. He had lived in Texas briefly in the mid-1980s, Sagebrush, just 30 miles from Elmwood. Old DMV files showed he owned a 1982 Chevrolet pickup, originally blue, registered until 1989. A 1987 report buried in Harlow PD files surfaced during the review. 3 days before Sarah's disappearance, a parent complained about a tall, dark-haired man in a blue pickup watching children at a local playground. The report had been filed as low priority and never connected to Elmwood. Side by side with Tommy Ruiz's statement, the descriptions aligned: age, build, hair, vehicle. Victor Ramos emerged as the only viable suspect. By spring 2023, probable cause was solid. A federal arrest warrant was issued for kidnapping and interstate transportation of a minor. A search warrant followed for Victor's current home, a small rental on the outskirts of a rural Arizona county. The operation was planned for dawn. FBI agents and local sheriff's deputies surrounded the quiet property. Victor, now 74, frail but alert, opened the door after the knock. He didn't resist. Handcuffed, he asked only one question, voice cracking. "Is she all right?" At the Tucson Federal Building, interrogation began. Victor denied everything at first, claimed Mia was his biological daughter born in Arizona, accused the DNA of being wrong. When shown the lab reports matching Sarah to the Thompsons, he went silent for a long minute. Then, quietly, "I gave her a better life than they ever could." He never explained what he meant. Motive remained murky. Loneliness, delusion, impulse turned permanent. He admitted taking her, admitted the forged documents bought through old contacts, admitted the moves to stay hidden. But the why stayed locked behind tired eyes. The search of his home yielded confirmation. A locked metal box containing fake birth certificates, an invalid social security card in Mia's name, old photos of her as a child, all taken in backyards or indoors, never public. A rusted keychain with a Chevrolet logo. Clippings from 1987, Texas newspapers about Sarah's disappearance, yellowed and carefully folded. Neighbor interviews painted the same pattern Sarah remembered. Victor had been overprotective to the point of isolation. No friends stayed over, no school trips without him, always an excuse. No evidence of accomplices surfaced. Financial records showed he lived frugally, no unexplained income. The abduction appeared to be the act of one man, planned or opportunistic, sustained for 35 years by relentless caution. Victor was indicted federally. The trial was swift, evidence overwhelming, DNA, documents, residency timeline, the overlooked 1987 playground report. Prosecutors portrayed a calculated taking, a stolen childhood. Defense argued diminished capacity and age, but the jury convicted on all counts. Sentencing came in late 2023, life without parole. Victor, frail in the courtroom, offered no statement. He died in federal custody 2 years later, taking whatever remained unsaid to the grave. For investigators, gaps lingered. Had he watched children before Sarah? The Harlow report suggested scouting, but no earlier pattern emerged. Why her specifically? Why keep her so long instead of harm? Those questions stayed unanswered, dark corners in an otherwise resolved file. But the case was closed. Solved not by traditional detective work, but by a consumer DNA test uploaded by the victim herself. It became a landmark example in training, how civilian genetics could reach back through decades and unlock doors that 1980s tools never could. For Sarah, the legal chapter ended with Victor's conviction. But her real journey, the one of identity, family, and rebuilding, was only beginning. In Texas, David and Lisa Thompson received the call they had stopped daring to imagine. An investigator asked them to come to Rangers headquarters in Austin. No details over the phone. They drove in silence, hands clasped tight. In a small conference room, the DNA report was placed in front of them. Parent-child match, Sarah Thompson, alive in Arizona, safe. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. David stared at the numbers as if they might vanish. When the investigator said, "She wants to meet when she's ready," both parents broke. 36 years of held breath released in sobs. Preparations were careful. Psychologists, victim advocates, NSMEC counselors. Sarah needed time to process. The Thompsons needed guidance on how to approach a daughter who was now a grown woman with an entire life they had missed. The first meeting was arranged for a quiet spring day in 2023 in a neutral hotel conference room near Austin. Only the three of them, 2 counselors, and 1 investigator. Sarah entered first, hesitating at the door. She looked like the age progressions come to life. Lisa's eyes, David's quiet steadiness, but with a guardedness earned over decades. David and Lisa stood, afraid to move too fast. Lisa whispered, "Sarah." Sarah's voice was small. "Hi." The hug came slowly, carefully, as if everyone feared the moment might shatter. When it finally happened, Lisa's arms around the daughter she had lost, David's hand on her shoulder. There were no words at first, just the sound of breathing, of years collapsing into one embrace. They sat afterward and talked for hours. Tentative questions, gentle answers. Sarah shared fragments of her Arizona life. The Thompsons told stories of the 6 years they had shared, showing phone photos of old albums. No one pushed, no one rushed. It was a beginning, fragile but real. The stolen decades could never be returned. But from that day forward, Sarah Thompson was no longer missing. She was home, not in the way childhood dreams imagined, but in a new way they were all learning together, one careful step at a time. The years following the reunion were not a fairy tale ending. They were something quieter, harder, and ultimately more real. Sarah moved slowly into her new identity. Legally, the process was straightforward but time-consuming, canceling the Mia Vargas records, restoring her original birth certificate, reissuing a social security number under her true name. Government agencies across Texas and Arizona coordinated to untangle 38 years of overlapping paperwork. Sarah worked with a victim advocate who handled most of the bureaucracy, sparing her the endless forms and phone calls. Emotionally, the ground shifted under her feet every day. She was Sarah Thompson again, but she had never lived as an adult Sarah Thompson. The 6-year-old in the photos was a stranger to her. The woman in the mirror was Mia. Therapy became a constant, weekly sessions with a specialist in long-term abduction survivors. They unpacked layers, the grief for a childhood stolen, the anger at Victor, the confusion of loving the only parent she had known while hating what he had done. David and Lisa entered therapy too, separately and together. They had spent decades preserving the memory of a little girl frozen at 6. Now they had to meet the woman she had become. Independent, cautious, shaped by experiences they could never fully understand. Sessions focused on boundaries, not overwhelming her with lost time, not expecting her to fill the role of the child they had mourned. Family therapy brought all three together. Conversations were careful at first, small shared memories from before 1987, gentle questions about the Arizona years. Sarah spoke of the isolation, the forged stories, the growing doubts. David and Lisa listened without judgment, without rushing to fill silences. Over months, the talks grew easier. Laughter came, tentative but genuine. Sarah chose to live in Austin, close enough for regular visits, far enough for space. She rented a small apartment, took online classes in social work, and began part-time work at a nonprofit supporting trafficking and abduction survivors. The work felt like turning pain outward, giving it purpose. Reintegration had rough edges. Crowds still made her tense. Certain smells, mesquite smoke, hot dust, could trigger flashes of that July afternoon. Blue pickups on the highway made her grip the wheel tighter. Support groups helped. Hearing other adult survivors describe similar dislocations made her feel less alone. The media attention was brief but intense. Authorities shielded her as much as possible. But the story, a child abducted in 1987, found through DNA 36 years later, spread quickly. Sarah gave one carefully controlled interview, speaking of vigilance and the power of genetic databases. She asked for privacy afterward, and most outlets respected it. Visits to Elmwood were planned with care. The first time, Sarah walked the old street with David and Lisa, stood in the backyard where the swing set had long since rusted away. The alley was paved now, ordinary. She felt the weight of what had happened, but also a strange calm, like closing a circle. Tommy Ruiz, now in his 40s, came to one family gathering. He had carried guilt all his life for not calling out that day. Sarah hugged him without hesitation. "You were 8, she said. "There was nothing you could have done." The words released something in both of them. Unanswered questions lingered. Victor's death in custody closed the door on any deeper confession. Investigators never found evidence of prior victims or accomplices. The Harlow playground sighting suggested he had watched children before choosing Sarah, but no pattern emerged. Why her? Why keep her alive and raise her for decades? Those shadows remained. Yet the lack of full answers did not erase what had been regained. Sarah built traditions with her parents, quiet Thanksgiving dinners, weekend drives through the hill country, planting bluebonnet seeds in spring. Ethan, her younger brother, became a steady presence, texts, video calls, visits where they talked like siblings catching up on lost time. By 2025, Sarah was 41. She had finished her degree, worked full-time, counseling other survivors, and married a quiet, understanding man she met through her nonprofit. They kept things small, no big wedding, just family and close friends under a pecan tree, echoing the one from her childhood backyard in a gentle, healing way. She spoke publicly now and then, advocating for expanded DNA databases and education on abduction prevention. Her message was simple. Vigilance matters, technology can reach further than we imagine, and recovery is possible even after decades. Elmwood honored the resolution quietly, a plaque in the community park remembering missing children and the importance of awareness. Sarah attended the dedication, planting a small oak that would grow slowly, steadily, like the family ties being rebuilt. Some nights she still dreamed of the alley, the truck door closing, the sudden leaving. But the dreams came less often, and when they did, she woke knowing exactly where she was. Safe, known, home. The case of Sarah Thompson became a quiet classic in cold case training. Proof that files never truly die, that one small sample of DNA can bridge decades, that truth, however long buried, has a way of finding light. For the Thompsons, the story did not end with loss. It ended with return, not the return of the 6-year-old they had lost, but the arrival of the woman she had become. A second chance, imperfect and late, but theirs all the same. And in the end, that was enough. Thank you all for joining Unsolved Stories on this long journey. From the heartbreak of a summer afternoon in 1987 to the unexpected miracle after nearly 4 decades. Cases solved after decades always remind us that the truth can be buried for a very long time, but it never truly disappears. If you found today's story meaningful, please hit the subscribe button right below so you don't miss the next chilling cold cases full of surprises. Every subscription is the motivation for us to keep bringing you the most authentic and emotional stories. See you in the next video on Unsolved Stories.